What if the very place you work tirelessly to help others is also the place where you feel the most alone? That's exactly what happened to Alana Davis, a dedicated nurse stepping into the prestigious Westbridge Medical Center. But from day one, she faced quiet whispers, cold shoulders, and an unforgiving supervisor intent on testing her every move. How could she possibly succeed when it felt like the whole institution was against her? Just when things seemed unbearable, a surprising ally emerged, a mysterious patient who was watching everything from his hospital bed. But who was he really? And why did he seem so invested in Alana's struggles? As tensions rise, Alana is forced into situations that test not just her skills, but her very spirit. Will she be able to stand strong and prove herself? Or will the prejudice and challenges break her down? Follow Alana's journey of resilience, unexpected revelations, and a fight for change that might just turn Westbridge upside down. But beware, things aren't always as they seem at this hospital. What secrets are lurking behind those polished walls? Stay tuned to find out. But before exploring the story, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit subscribe to discover even more captivating stories. Alana Davis stepped off the bus and took a deep breath, gazing at the modern structure of Westbridge Medical Center. Nestled in a prosperous neighborhood, the hospital's pristine exterior shimmered in the morning light, symbolizing the promise of a bright career she'd worked so hard to achieve. A dedicated black nurse with years of experience, Alana had dreamed of working in a top-tier facility, and today marked her first day as part of their nursing team. She felt a spark of pride and determination, envisioning herself making a difference in people's lives. As her mother always reminded her, be strong, be patient, your worth will show. The interior was just as immaculate, the polished floors and fluorescent lights reflecting an aura of sterile professionalism. Alana adjusted her crisp white uniform, squared her shoulders, and made her way to the nurse's station, prepared to meet her new colleagues. Yet, as she approached, conversations fell silent, and the nurses around the station glanced at her, some with curiosity, others with expressions she couldn't quite read. Clearing her throat, she introduced herself. "Hello, I'm Alana Davis, the new nurse here. Could someone point me to the head nurse's office?" A tall, slim nurse with straight blonde hair looked her up and down, giving her a tight-lipped smile that seemed more out of politeness than warmth. "Down the hall, second door on your left," she replied with a hint of formality, then turned her attention back to the chart in front of her. Alana thanked her, pushing aside the uneasy feeling that had started to creep in. As she walked through the hallway, she could feel eyes on her back. Maybe it was just first-day jitters, she told herself, though she couldn't shake the sense that there was something more. Just before she reached the head nurse's office, a man in a pristine white coat stepped out of a nearby room, his presence commanding attention. His silver hair and confident stride marked him as someone important. She recognized him from the employee guide as Dr. Victor Grant, one of the hospital's senior surgeons. Eager to make a good impression, she approached him with a warm smile. "Good morning, Dr. Grant. I'm Alana Davis, the new nurse starting today. I'm thrilled to be working here." Dr. Grant paused, his sharp gray eyes assessing her for a moment. "Ah, the new hire," he said, his tone flat, almost dismissive. "I trust you're aware that Westbridge maintains a rigorous standard. We don't tolerate mistakes." Before Alana could respond, he turned on his heel and strode down the hallway, leaving her standing there with her hands still extended, feeling a twinge of disappointment. She swallowed her frustration, reminding herself that this was just one interaction. Dr. Grant didn't know her or her abilities, and she wouldn't let this exchange overshadow the opportunity she had in front of her. Stepping into the head nurse's office, Alana met Patricia Monroe, a stern woman with a clipboard, barely looking up as she entered. "Miss Davis, I presume?" she said in a brisk tone. "We expect diligence and thoroughness. I'll show you to your assigned area." Following Patricia down another corridor, Alana noticed a familiar pattern. Brief glances from other staff, muted whispers, and the subtle shift in atmosphere as she walked by. Her excitement was starting to wane, replaced by an uncomfortable sense of isolation. Patricia led her into the nurse's lounge, going over various protocols and patient assignments, never bothering to make small talk. It was as if Alana was there for a briefing rather than a welcome. Despite her best efforts to engage Patricia, the head nurse remained strictly professional, her tone clipped and distant. When the formal orientation was over, Alana's spirits were heavy, but she resolved to rise above the discomfort. Her mother's words played in her mind again, reminding her that strength didn't come from easy situations. "You have a purpose, Alana," her mother used to say. "You'll face tough moments, but don't let them see you falter. Remember, you're here because you're qualified." Later that afternoon, as Alana settled into her routine, she overheard two nurses talking in low voices by the supply closet. "Did you see the new nurse?" one whispered. "Yes, I don't know what they were thinking hiring her here," the other replied, a note of derision in her voice. Their words sent a pang through Alana's chest. The realization hit her hard. This wasn't just about being a newcomer. It was about her not fitting into their preconceived mold of who belonged at Westbridge. In her heart, she knew that her journey here wouldn't be just about patient care. It would also be about challenging these silent judgments and carving her own space. The day stretched on, and while Alana worked diligently, the unspoken slights continued. A simple request to adjust her patient load was met with tight-lipped silence, and her attempts to join conversations were politely, but firmly, deflected. She was no stranger to hard work, but this felt different. A subtle wall erected around her, one that didn't appear to be coming down anytime soon. When her shift finally ended, Alana returned to the locker room, her body aching from the long day and her mind burdened with the weight of silent isolation. She took out her phone, staring at her mother's number, wondering if she should call. Just hearing her mother's voice would help, she thought. But as she dialed, her resolve wavered. She wanted to be strong, to handle this on her own. Yet the feeling of being judged, of being underestimated, lingered, like a dull ache she couldn't shake off. Finally, her mother picked up, her warm voice breaking through Alana's weariness. "Hey, baby girl, how was your first day?" Alana hesitated, a lump forming in her throat, but then she managed to answer. "It was challenging, Mama. Not exactly what I expected." There was a pause on the other end before her mother replied, her voice gentle but unwavering. "Remember, Alana, you didn't come this far to let anyone make you feel less than. You're here for a reason, and don't let them take that from you. Show them who you are." Her mother's words filled her with a renewed sense of purpose. She knew she couldn't change their minds overnight, but she was determined not to give up, to show her strength through her work and her perseverance. She'd endured challenges before, and this was just another hurdle in her journey. The following morning, as Alana prepared to step into Westbridge Medical Center once more, she felt a familiar fire burning within her. She wasn't just a new nurse here. She was a force, ready to prove herself not only as a skilled nurse, but as someone who wouldn't back down. This was just the beginning. The following weeks at Westbridge Medical Center unfolded like a slow, steady storm cloud over Alana Davis's work life. It began with small things, subtle enough that, to an outsider, they might have appeared insignificant. Yet, each instance left Alana with a sinking feeling that her new job was becoming less about patient care and more about navigating invisible barriers. From the outset, Alana noticed she was consistently assigned the most challenging patients. In one instance, she was given Mr. Braden, a notorious patient who was known for his aggression and disdainful attitude toward the staff. On another shift, she was handed the full care of Mrs. Thompson, a patient requiring complex wound management and constant monitoring. Though Alana never shied away from hard work, it was becoming evident that her white colleagues weren't assigned these high-stress cases nearly as often. Instead, they were often given tasks that allowed them more time to catch their breath or chat briefly between rounds. One afternoon, as she approached the nurse's station to update a patient's chart, Alana overheard two of her colleagues laughing and chatting casually. When she arrived, the conversation ceased, and the two nurses gave her a polite but dismissive nod before moving away, whispering to each other as they went. "Hey, Alana," came the voice of Patricia, the head nurse, from behind the counter. "Could you handle the rounds for Mr. Kane in 307? He's been a bit difficult today." Patricia's request sounded routine, but Alana couldn't help noticing the almost hidden smirk on her face. "Of course, I'll see to it right away," Alana replied, keeping her tone professional. She found Mr. Kane to be far from a simple case. His health had been deteriorating rapidly, and he was vocal about his distrust of young, inexperienced nurses, as he liked to call them. As Alana approached his room, she took a deep breath, mentally preparing herself for the barrage of complaints that would inevitably follow. "Who are you now?" he snapped as soon as she entered. "They just keep sending anyone in here." Alana smiled, keeping her voice steady. "I'm Alana Davis, Mr. Kane. I'll be your nurse today. I'm here to take your vitals and make sure you're comfortable." Mr. Kane scoffed, crossing his arms. "I told them I wanted someone who knows what they're doing," he muttered, his gaze fixed on the wall. Ignoring the sting of his words, Alana focused on her duties, checking his vitals and updating his charts with precision. As she worked, she reminded herself of her purpose: to deliver the best care possible, regardless of the circumstances. But these moments began piling up. Each day, Alana found herself caring for patients who seemed to test her patience and resilience to the limit. During one particularly busy shift, she was tasked with monitoring 3 high-maintenance patients simultaneously, while her colleagues took on significantly lighter loads. Exhausted and frustrated, Alana approached Patricia during a quiet moment. "Patricia, I was wondering if there's a specific reason I'm being assigned to more complex cases every day," Alana asked, her tone respectful but firm. Patricia raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a thin smile. "I assumed someone with your level of experience would want the challenge, Alana. You seemed like you could handle it," she replied, her words dripping with a subtle condescension. Alana felt her stomach clench. The words were thinly veiled, as though Patricia was testing her, waiting to see if she would buckle under the pressure. Alana nodded, refusing to let Patricia see any hint of frustration. "Of course, I'm more than capable," she replied, her voice steady. But inside, the weight of isolation was beginning to take its toll. The nurse's lounge, which should have been a refuge for her, quickly became another reminder of her solitude. During breaks, Alana would sit alone, her colleagues barely acknowledging her presence. Any attempt she made to join conversations was met with lukewarm responses or polite nods that left her feeling even more isolated. One afternoon, as she sat quietly in the corner, sipping her coffee, 2 nurses entered the lounge, chatting animatedly about their weekend plans. They glanced at her, then continued their conversation in hushed voices. Alana lowered her gaze, pretending not to notice, but the sting was undeniable. It wasn't that they were overtly rude, but the message was clear. She was an outsider. On her way out that evening, she overheard a group of nurses talking near the entrance. One of them, a tall nurse named Melissa, who always seemed particularly distant, was whispering to another nurse, her tone dismissive. "Honestly, I don't know why they felt the need to bring someone like her in here. This isn't exactly a place where—" Her voice trailed off as they noticed Alana approaching. They quickly turned away, their conversation dropping into silence. That night, as Alana rode the bus home, she replayed the day's events in her mind. The optimism she had once felt was now weighed down by the silent but constant reminders of her unwelcome presence. She could endure the hard work, but the isolation was chipping away at her confidence, leaving her questioning how long she could bear it. The next morning, as she prepared for another shift, her phone rang. It was her mother, calling just as Alana was about to step out the door. "Hey, Mama," she answered, trying to keep her voice bright. "How's it going over there, sweetheart? You settling in all right?" her mother asked, her voice warm and familiar. Alana hesitated, torn between wanting to vent her frustrations and not wanting to worry her mother. "It's going," she replied carefully. "The work is intense, but I'm managing." Her mother's tone softened. "Alana, remember what I always told you. Sometimes when you're going through the toughest trials, it's because something important is waiting on the other side. Don't you give them the satisfaction of seeing you struggle." Her mother's words washed over her like a balm, filling her with a renewed resolve. She had fought too hard to let a few cold shoulders and challenging patients break her spirit. As Alana arrived at the hospital that morning, she walked through the hallways with her head held high. The weight of isolation still lingered, but she was determined to prove her resilience. She was there to care for her patients and to stand firm in the face of the subtle barriers set before her. When Patricia handed her another assignment filled with high-demand patients, Alana simply nodded, resolved to show her worth through her work. And as she stepped into Mr. Kane's room that day, she felt a quiet strength building within her, a strength she knew would carry her through the challenges ahead, no matter how isolating or difficult. By the third week, Alana Davis had resigned herself to the harsh realities of her new workplace. Each day blurred into the next, filled with grueling patient loads and subtle exclusion that weighed heavily on her spirit. Yet, as she braced herself for another challenging day, a surprising assignment awaited her. "Alana, you'll be responsible for Mr. Thomas Blake in room 312 today," Patricia announced with an uncharacteristic tone of caution. "Mr. Blake?" Alana repeated, curious about this sudden change. Patricia gave a tight-lipped nod. "A high-profile patient. Had a skiing accident. Both arms broken and some bruised ribs. He'll need attentive care." Alana raised her eyebrows, but didn't question it further. She was used to being assigned the most challenging cases, but this time, the task seemed different. Patricia's guarded tone hinted that this patient might be more than he appeared. As she approached room 312, Alana prepared herself to meet another demanding patient. Instead, she found a middle-aged man with graying hair, seated upright in bed with his arms in heavy casts. His expression was calm, his gaze sharp and observant. There was a quiet dignity about him that immediately set him apart from the patients she usually cared for. Alana offered a warm smile. "Good morning, Mr. Blake. I'm Alana Davis, your nurse. I'll be helping you with your recovery." He returned her smile with a slight nod. "Good morning, Ms. Davis. Please call me Thomas." His voice was calm and reassuring, his tone respectful, something she hadn't often encountered at Westbridge. As she moved to check his vitals, he watched her with a steady, almost thoughtful gaze, taking in each of her movements. There was none of the disdain or skepticism she had come to expect from other patients, just a genuine, quiet curiosity. "Thank you for your help, Ms. Davis," he said as she adjusted his foredrip. "I can only imagine how exhausting your work must be, but you handle it all with such precision and care." Alana paused, surprised. Patients rarely acknowledged the difficulty of her role, let alone offered words of gratitude. She nodded politely, unsure of how to respond. "It's my job to help," she replied simply, focusing on recording his vitals. A comfortable silence settled over them, broken only when Mr. Blake spoke again. "Ms. Davis," he began, his tone gentle but probing, "if you don't mind me asking, how have you found working at Westbridge?" Alana hesitated. It was an innocuous question, yet there was an unexpected depth to it, as if he were inviting her to share more than just a surface-level response. She weighed her words carefully, not wanting to betray the tension she faced daily. "It's been an adjustment," she admitted finally. "Every job has its challenges." He gave a knowing nod, his eyes never leaving hers. "Challenges can be transformative, I suppose, if we approach them the right way. But there's no shame in acknowledging when things are difficult." Something in his tone suggested he understood more than he let on, though Alana couldn't quite place why. Feeling a rare moment of trust, she offered a small smile, allowing a hint of her struggle to show. "Thank you, Mr. Blake," she replied quietly. "That means a lot." Over the next few days, Alana found herself spending more time with Thomas than with any other patient. Unlike others, he was refreshingly kind and considerate, and she couldn't help but feel a sense of relief in his presence. Their conversations were brief but meaningful. He seemed genuinely interested in her experiences, asking about her background, her training, and even her aspirations. And each time she entered his room, the exhaustion that plagued her from dealing with her colleagues seemed to melt away, if only temporarily. One afternoon, while helping him adjust his bed, Thomas glanced at her thoughtfully. "You're very talented, Ms. Davis. I imagine you faced more than a few obstacles to get where you are." Alana paused, taken aback by the perceptiveness in his words. There was something about Thomas Blake that made her feel seen, as though he could read the layers of exhaustion and resilience she carried. "I suppose you could say that," she replied carefully. It's not always an easy path, but I believe it's worth it. Thomas nodded approvingly. Worthwhile paths rarely are, he murmured, almost to himself. I find that true strength often reveals itself in those willing to walk them. Alana couldn't help but feel that Thomas was speaking from personal experience, though she couldn't quite imagine what struggles a patient with his background might have faced. Despite his injuries, he carried himself with a quiet authority that set him apart, a quality that went beyond his refined mannerisms. As she finished her tasks and prepared to leave the room, Thomas's voice stopped her. "Ms. Davis," he said, his tone warmer than usual, "thank you for your patience and professionalism. You bring a lightness to this place. Not everyone here appreciates it, but I do." Alana blinked, momentarily caught off guard by his words. She gave him a genuine smile, her voice filled with appreciation. "Thank you, Mr. Blake. That means more than you know." The door closed softly behind her as she left, her heart feeling lighter than it had in weeks. For the first time since she had started at Westbridge, she felt a flicker of validation, a reminder of why she had chosen this path. Yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to Thomas Blake. His keen observations and empathetic questions hinted at a depth she hadn't encountered with other patients. The next morning, as she headed to his room with his scheduled medications, Alana overheard two nurses whispering nearby. "Did you know that Mr. Blake's connected to the board?" One nurse whispered to another. "Apparently, he's some big name in healthcare management." The revelation sent a jolt through Alana. Could it be that Thomas was more than just a high-profile patient? As she approached his room, she wondered if he'd been silently observing more than just her care. Inside, she greeted him with her usual smile, though her mind was racing with questions. Thomas greeted her as warmly as always, but today, Alana looked at him with a new perspective. This wasn't merely a patient recovering from an accident. This was someone who understood the inner workings of the healthcare world, someone who might have more influence than he let on. For now, she decided to keep this newfound insight to herself. But the subtle shift in their dynamic filled her with a sense of hope. Perhaps Thomas Blake would be more than just a temporary presence in her life. And perhaps, just perhaps, his influence might be the key to changing Westbridge in ways she hadn't dared to imagine. Days at Westbridge Medical Center grew increasingly challenging for Alana Davis. She had managed to find a small sanctuary in her moments with Thomas Blake, but the hostility around her seemed to be intensifying. The more she succeeded with her patients, the more resistance she faced from her colleagues and superiors. One morning, Alana was updating patient charts near the nurses' station when she overheard two nurses murmuring in low voices just around the corner. "I just don't understand why they're bringing in people like her." One of them whispered, a note of disdain clear in her tone. "Westbridge isn't that kind of hospital." The other nurse scoffed softly. "I know. She doesn't belong here. I don't care how qualified she is. She's just a diversity hire, and it shows." Alana felt her stomach drop. She had known she wasn't fully accepted, but hearing her colleagues' raw, unfiltered thoughts stung deeply. Taking a shaky breath, she forced herself to keep her expression neutral as she continued her work, resisting the urge to confront them. She knew that speaking up would only reinforce their prejudices, and besides, confronting them would likely lead to no change at all. Still, the harsh words lingered in her mind, gnawing away at her confidence. She had sacrificed so much to get here, yet her efforts seemed invisible to the very people she was working alongside. As the day wore on, Alana continued her rounds, carrying the weight of those whispered judgments with her. When she went to check on Thomas Blake later that afternoon, her spirit felt heavier than ever. She entered his room, pasting on a smile, though her exhaustion was evident in her eyes. Thomas studied her face quietly as she began her routine. He was perceptive as always, and within moments he asked, "Rough day, Ms. Davis?" Alana hesitated, unsure of how much she could share. She was used to keeping her struggles private, knowing that vulnerability often made her seem weaker in the eyes of those who judged her. But there was something in Thomas's calm gaze that made her feel safe, almost as if he had already sensed the burden she carried. "Just a few challenges," she replied softly, focusing on adjusting his fore. "Sometimes it feels like no matter how hard I try, I'll never be seen for my work alone. Thomas's face softened, a mixture of empathy and understanding in his eyes. It must be exhausting, putting in all your effort and still feeling unseen, he said, his voice carrying a weight of sincerity that made her heart ache. But remember, true resilience isn't about proving yourself to others. It's about honoring your own worth. His words struck a chord deep within her. Alana hadn't expected to find an ally and a patient, but Thomas's unwavering support gave her the strength she needed to continue. She gave him a grateful nod, letting the moment of shared understanding buoy her spirits, if only for a little while. Later that afternoon, as she was preparing for the next shift, Alana was called into Dr. Grant's office. Her heart sank. Dr. Grant rarely spoke to her unless it was to find fault with her work. Taking a deep breath, she entered the room, bracing herself. Dr. Grant sat behind his desk, arms crossed, his expression cold and unreadable. "Ms. Davis, I've noticed a few lapses in efficiency from you," he began, his tone devoid of warmth. "This hospital maintains a high standard, and we expect all of our staff to meet that without exception." Alana felt her cheeks flush, anger rising within her. She knew she had been working harder than most of her colleagues, often juggling the toughest cases with little to no support. But Dr. Grant's gaze was unwavering, as though he had already made up his mind about her abilities. "Dr. Grant, I assure you that I've been following all protocols and doing my best to provide quality care," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "If there's something specific you're concerned about, I'd be happy to address it." Dr. Grant's expression barely flickered. "I'm simply reminding you of our expectations, Ms. Davis. I hope you're able to keep up with them." As she left his office, Alana felt drained. She replayed the conversation over and over, knowing full well that her only fault was being under constant scrutiny. The blatant unfairness of it gnawed at her, and the emotional toll was beginning to wear her down. The next day, as she made her rounds, she noticed Thomas observing her closely. When she entered his room, he motioned for her to take a seat beside him. "Ms. Davis," he began gently, "I know you're under a lot of pressure here, and though it may not feel like it, your strength is making a difference." Alana felt her eyes begin to sting, but she blinked back the tears. "It just feels like no matter what I do, it's not enough. Every mistake is amplified, and every success, well, it seems to go unnoticed." Thomas nodded, understanding etched into his face. "Sometimes the smallest actions can be the most powerful. I've seen the way you treat your patients, with kindness, patience, and respect. It doesn't go unnoticed, even if it seems that way now." She let his words sink in, feeling a strange sense of hope rekindle inside her. Thomas continued, his tone becoming more pointed, as if sharing a hidden truth. "Your resilience here could have a ripple effect, one that lasts long after you've moved on from Westbridge," he said, a knowing look in his eye. "Sometimes change comes slowly, but when it comes, it's unstoppable." Though she didn't fully understand his words, Alana felt an unspoken promise woven into them. It was as though Thomas was urging her to keep going, to not let the current tide of adversity force her to abandon her purpose. As she left his room, a quiet determination settled over her. She would endure. She would prove, not only to herself, but to anyone who doubted her, that her place here was earned. She wouldn't allow their biases to dictate her journey. Over the next few shifts, Alana focused on her work with renewed resolve, her mother's words and Thomas's encouragement echoing in her mind. Despite the obstacles and the constant whispers, she found herself growing stronger. She was no longer just surviving. She was pushing back, one small act of kindness at a time, weaving resilience into every interaction. And though her colleagues might not see it, Alana knew that she was planting seeds for something far greater, a silent revolution, one that would one day change the very fabric of Westbridge Medical Center. For now, it was enough to carry on, knowing she was part of a journey larger than herself, and believing that someday her perseverance would lead to change. The announcement came suddenly. Alana Davis was reviewing patient charts when Patricia, the head nurse, approached her, looking stern. "Alana, Dr. Grant has requested you to assist him in the operating room this afternoon." It's a high-stakes procedure, so be prepared." Alana's heart skipped a beat. She was well aware that Dr. Grant was known for his exacting standards and, lately, for his critical eye toward her. This felt less like a routine assignment and more like a test, perhaps even a trap. Nonetheless, she steadied herself, knowing she had the training and skill to handle any operation. Hours later, she stood scrubbed in, watching the patient being prepped for the complex procedure. Dr. Grant entered with his usual confident stride, his expression unreadable beneath his surgical mask. As the operation began, Alana focused intently, anticipating each of Dr. Grant's needs. She handed instruments before he asked for them, her movements precise, her focus unbreakable. But as the surgery progressed, Alana noticed something unsettling. Dr. Grant appeared tense, his hands slightly unsteady, a stark contrast to the calm confidence he usually exuded. She tried to dismiss it, chalking it up to the gravity of the procedure, but her instincts kept her alert. Then, just as Dr. Grant was about to make a critical incision near the patient's heart, Alana noticed an anatomical detail that didn't align with his approach. Her training told her that the angle he was about to take posed a serious risk. It could lead to excessive bleeding or even fatal damage to a major artery. "Dr. Grant," Alana said carefully, trying to keep her voice steady, "I believe a slight adjustment to the incision angle would reduce the risk here." "The artery." Dr. Grant's head snapped up, his eyes flashing with irritation. "Are you questioning my expertise, Nurse Davis?" he demanded, his tone sharp. Alana swallowed, but she didn't back down. "With all due respect, Doctor, I'm only suggesting that it may be safer to shift the angle slightly to avoid the artery. It's just a precaution." The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a scalpel. Alana could feel the eyes of the other surgical staff on her, waiting to see how Dr. Grant would respond. For a moment, Dr. Grant looked as though he might dismiss her suggestion outright. But then, begrudgingly, he adjusted his approach, shifting the angle as she had recommended. As the operation continued, it became clear that her intervention had likely saved the patient from a grave complication. The surgery concluded successfully, and Alana let out a breath of relief as she began to assist with the cleanup. But her sense of accomplishment was short-lived. As soon as the patient was transferred to recovery, Dr. Grant turned to her, his voice low but seething. "That was reckless, Nurse Davis," he hissed, pulling her aside. "You don't presume to correct me in my own operating room. I don't care how much training you've had. Your job is to follow orders, not to think you know better than your superiors." Alana held her ground, despite the unfairness of his reprimand. "I apologize if my approach was out of line, Dr. Grant, but I believe I was acting in the patient's best interest." Dr. Grant's eyes narrowed. "Your beliefs have no place in my or. This hospital isn't here to indulge your ambitions or make statements about diversity. Remember your place, Nurse Davis." His words cut deep, laying bare his prejudice. For him, Alana's years of hard work, her skills, and even her actions in the operating room were irrelevant. Her presence seemed to be an affront to him. Holding back the hurt that threatened to rise, Alana met his gaze, her voice unwavering. "Understood, Dr. Grant. I will always put the patient's well-being first." With a final look of disdain, Dr. Grant turned and left the room. Alone in the hallway, Alana felt the full weight of the confrontation sink in. She had done her job, and yet her commitment was seen as insubordination, her skills as overreach. But as she stood there, gathering herself, she felt a quiet strength settle within her. If her dedication to patient care placed her at odds with people like Dr. Grant, then so be it. She would continue to speak up, to fight for her place here, and for the right to work with dignity. For Alana, the ordeal in the OR was yet another reminder of the uphill battle she faced. Yet it also reinforced her resolve to persevere, knowing that her actions, however unappreciated, could make a difference, one patient, one moment at a time. The tension in Westbridge Medical Center had reached a boiling point. Alana Davis stood in the hallway, still reeling from her confrontation with Dr. Grant in the operating room. She had done everything right, and yet her dedication had only drawn more ire and hostility. As she walked toward the break room, she felt the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her. But before she could reach the door, she heard Dr. Grant's voice booming from down the hall. "Ms. Davis," he barked, his tone sharp with barely concealed anger. Alana turned, steeling herself, only to see Thomas Blake, her kind patient from room 312, watching the interaction from his doorway with a calm yet piercing gaze. Dr. Grant's voice grew louder, his accusations growing more pointed. "You don't belong in this hospital if you can't follow protocol. Your constant need to question authority is disruptive, and frankly, it's a liability. This hospital doesn't need—" "That's enough, Dr. Grant," a voice interrupted, calm but unmistakably authoritative. Thomas Blake stepped forward, his presence commanding as he addressed the furious doctor. "I think you've lost sight of what this hospital is meant to stand for." Dr. Grant looked stunned, glancing back and forth between Alana and Thomas, his confidence faltering. "Mr. Blake," he stammered, I didn't realize you were here." "Oh, I've been here, Dr. Grant," Thomas replied, his tone steady. "And I've seen enough." Dr. Grant's eyes widened in realization as Thomas straightened his posture. "Allow me to introduce myself properly. My name is Thomas Blake, CEO of Healthcare United, the organization that owns Westbridge Medical Center." Alana felt her heart skip a beat. She looked at Thomas, overwhelmed by the revelation. The kind, observant patient she had been caring for was far more powerful than she had imagined. Thomas's calm but unwavering gaze never left Dr. Grant, who was visibly shaken. "During my stay here, I've observed more than just the patient care," Thomas continued, his voice low but firm. "I've seen a culture that tolerates discrimination and undermines the value of exceptional staff like Nurse Davis. This toxic environment ends now." Dr. Grant's face paled, but he attempted to regain control. "Mr. Blake, I assure you, this is a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding, Dr. Grant," Thomas interrupted, his tone final. "Your behavior has been observed and documented, and action will be taken to correct this environment. Effective immediately, I am initiating a full investigation into the culture at Westbridge." Turning to Alana, Thomas's expression softened. "Ms. Davis, you've shown incredible resilience and dedication. Rest assured, change is coming. This hospital will become a place where staff members like you are respected and valued." Alana, overwhelmed, managed a quiet, "Thank you, Mr. Blake." His words filled her with a mixture of relief and disbelief. After weeks of enduring exclusion, she had found an unexpected ally, someone who saw her worth and was willing to act on it. As Thomas walked away, Alana felt a new sense of hope, a promise that Westbridge's toxic culture would finally be addressed. For the first time since she had arrived, she felt that her struggle might lead to real change. The days following Mr. Blake's revelation as CEO were a whirlwind at Westbridge Medical Center. The hospital's usual routines seemed to have been disrupted, replaced by an atmosphere of urgency and tension. Rumors spread quickly as staff members learned about the impending investigation. Many appeared nervous, and others hopeful, as if waiting for a long-overdue shift to take place. In a decisive meeting with the hospital board and key administrators, Mr. Blake outlined a comprehensive plan for change. First on his list was an immediate investigation into any discriminatory practices within Westbridge, led by an external auditing firm. Dr. Grant's conduct would be thoroughly reviewed, and he was placed on administrative leave pending the results. The announcement sent shockwaves through the hospital staff, as Dr. Grant had long been an untouchable figure. But Mr. Blake didn't stop there. He also demanded structural reforms aimed at creating a more inclusive and supportive environment. This included mandatory diversity and inclusion training, mentorship programs for minority staff, and a review of hiring and promotion practices to ensure fairness at every level. For Alana, the changes felt surreal. Just weeks ago, she had felt isolated, her efforts going unrecognized. Now, she found herself at the center of the reform she had silently hoped for. On a particularly quiet afternoon, Patricia, the head nurse, approached her with an expression Alana hadn't seen before, something resembling respect. "Alana, Mr. Blake has recommended you for the new Diversity and Inclusion Committee," Patricia said, her tone softer than usual. He believes your perspective and experiences will be valuable in shaping the hospital's new policies. We'd be honored to have you contribute. Alana felt a surge of emotion. She had spent so long feeling like an outsider that the invitation felt both validating and transformative. Thank you, Patricia. I'd be glad to help, she replied, keeping her voice steady, though her heart raced with gratitude and purpose. The committee meetings began that same week, bringing together a diverse group of individuals from different departments within the hospital. Alana quickly found her footing, sharing her insights into the challenges she and others had faced. Her colleagues listened intently, and for the first time, Alana felt her voice carried weight. One afternoon, during a committee discussion, a colleague named Sarah, who had previously kept her distance, spoke up. Alana, I want to say I'm sorry. I didn't realize the extent of what you were dealing with here. I see it differently now, and I want to be part of the change. Alana nodded, her heart softening. She could sense a genuine shift among her peers, a newfound willingness to confront issues they'd long ignored. The words of encouragement and apologies, though late, reinforced her belief that change was indeed possible. By the end of the week, Westbridge felt like a different place. The walls that had once felt cold and unwelcoming now seemed filled with the promise of transformation. Alana felt a sense of belonging she had never thought she'd experience here, and with each committee meeting, her vision for a better hospital grew clearer. For Alana, this was more than just a role. It was a mission to ensure that Westbridge became a place where no one would have to face the isolation and prejudice she had endured. And with Mr. Blake's support, she was ready to help lead the way. The formal announcement came one crisp Monday morning. Alana Davis had been appointed as Westbridge Medical Center's first-ever Chief Diversity Officer. The title felt both empowering and daunting as it sank in. Just weeks earlier, she had felt alone, struggling to prove her worth in a hostile environment. Now, she stood at the forefront of a movement to reshape the very culture that had nearly pushed her out. Alana took a deep breath as she entered her new office, a modest room, but one that symbolized a significant step forward. The walls were bare, and a single window overlooked the bustling hospital grounds. She set her bag down, realizing that the transformation she was about to lead extended beyond the walls of this room. It reached every corner of Westbridge, and her role would be key in guiding it. Despite the initial wave of excitement, Alana couldn't ignore the nerves bubbling up inside her. Her responsibility was monumental, and she knew she would face resistance from some of her colleagues. But there was no turning back now. She recalled her mother's words about resilience and reminded herself that every step she took was not only for herself, but for the many others who had felt silenced in this environment. Her first objective as Chief Diversity Officer was to implement mandatory diversity and inclusion training across the hospital. This program was designed to bring awareness to biases, promote empathy, and encourage a respectful and collaborative atmosphere. The training would include both seminars and workshops, ensuring that every staff member, from administration to nurses to doctors, understood the importance of inclusion and the role they each played in fostering a supportive workplace. The following week, Alana introduced herself to each department, explaining the goals of the diversity program and what it meant for the future of Westbridge. During one of these introductions, she encountered Dr. Carter, a senior surgeon known for his bluntness. "Look, Alana, I appreciate the sentiment," he began, his tone cautious. "But do you really believe a few workshops are going to change the way people think?" Alana met his gaze, her voice calm yet resolute. "Dr. Carter, I know that true change doesn't happen overnight, but sometimes awareness is the first step. People need to see the impact their behavior has on others. This training won't fix everything, but it's a starting point. And every starting point matters." Dr. Carter nodded, his expression softening slightly. "All right, let's see where this takes us." Over the next few weeks, the hospital's diversity training began in earnest. Alana sat in on several sessions, watching his staff engage with concepts like unconscious bias and cultural awareness. Though some were initially skeptical, she observed a gradual shift. Many staff members seemed to appreciate the chance to reflect on their actions, realizing how small changes in behavior could create a ripple effect of respect and understanding. In addition to the training, Alana worked closely with the administration to review and revise Westbridge's hiring and promotion policies. The goal was to create a more transparent process that would offer equal opportunities for all, regardless of background. This included implementing mentorship programs for junior staff from underrepresented groups, allowing them to gain the support and guidance they needed to thrive. As her work continued, Alana found herself becoming a source of support for many of her colleagues. Nurses and other staff members who had previously kept their distance now approached her, sharing their own experiences and frustrations. Some confided in her about challenges they had faced with other colleagues, while others simply thanked her for helping bring about a change they had never thought possible. News of the sweeping changes at Westbridge Medical Center began to spread beyond the hospital walls. What had started as a quiet initiative to address biases and discrimination within a single institution had sparked a movement. Alana Davis's journey, from a resilient nurse standing alone to a transformative leader shaping a more inclusive culture, caught the attention of local media and soon, healthcare publications across the region. Alana received her first call from a prominent health journal a month after the diversity training at Westbridge had concluded. The journalist was interested in hearing how the hospital had transitioned from a place of exclusion to one that was, according to a recent staff survey, more collaborative and supportive. The resulting article highlighted the positive impacts of Alana's diversity and inclusion initiatives, her commitment to fostering change, and her role as the hospital's first chief diversity officer. The article resonated with readers, sparking curiosity among leaders in other healthcare institutions about how they could implement similar transformations. The following week, Alana was invited to speak at a local healthcare conference. Nervous but eager to share her story, she prepared a presentation that outlined her journey and the specific steps Westbridge had taken to shift its culture. Standing in front of an audience filled with doctors, nurses, administrators, and healthcare leaders, Alana felt a surge of pride, though her hands trembled slightly as she began. "Good morning, everyone," she greeted, her voice steadying as she continued. "I stand here today as a former nurse who once felt isolated, questioning if I would ever be seen for my work alone. But today, I'm here as someone who has witnessed firsthand how determination and a commitment to change can transform even the most ingrained cultures." She spoke about her initial struggles at Westbridge, the silent walls she had faced, and the courage it took to continue her work in an environment that didn't fully welcome her. Alana shared the pivotal moment when Thomas Blake had revealed his identity, and how his support had empowered her to enact the very changes she had longed for. As a healthcare community, she emphasized, we cannot afford to let prejudices and biases weaken our institutions. When we fail to create inclusive environments, we limit our own potential to provide compassionate, high-quality care. As Alana spoke, she could see heads nodding in agreement. The audience was captivated, moved not only by her experiences but by the practical outcomes her efforts had achieved at Westbridge. The presentation concluded with a Q&A session, during which attendees asked thoughtful questions, eager to learn more about the diversity and inclusion strategies she had implemented. "How did you handle the initial resistance?" one hospital director asked, her tone filled with genuine curiosity. Alana smiled, recalling the early days of her journey. "It wasn't easy. Resistance came in many forms, from overt dismissiveness to quiet exclusion. But I found strength in knowing that my work was bigger than me. Change doesn't happen overnight, but with every small step, you build momentum. Eventually, even those who were initially hesitant began to see the benefits and embrace the new culture." The ripple effect of Alana's presentation was immediate. Over the following weeks, healthcare institutions began reaching out to her, requesting guidance on how they could launch similar programs. She found herself consulting with hospitals, clinics, and even nursing schools, each one eager to make their environments more inclusive and supportive. Months later, Alana was invited to deliver the keynote address at a national conference on healthcare equality. This time, she stood on stage before hundreds of professionals from across the country, all looking to her for inspiration and insight. She spoke with conviction, sharing her belief that true inclusion could only be achieved through empathy, transparency, and a shared commitment to growth. "Each one of us has the power to make a difference, no matter how small," Alana urged the audience. When we show empathy, when we listen and make space for others, we create a foundation for lasting change. Inclusion isn't just a policy or a training session. It's a way of life that shapes every interaction and decision. The response was overwhelming. Healthcare professionals from various backgrounds approached her, thanking her for her courage and leadership. Some shared stories of their own struggles with workplace discrimination, while others expressed gratitude for the practical advice she had provided. One particular encounter struck her deeply. A young nurse from a rural hospital approached her with tears in her eyes. "Your story, it's my story too. I've been struggling to feel seen where I work, but hearing you today has given me hope. Thank you for reminding me that I'm not alone, and that change is possible." Alana embraced the young nurse, feeling a profound connection. "You're never alone," she said softly. "Keep going, and don't ever let them make you question your worth. You have a purpose, and it's worth fighting for." As the conference concluded, Alana returned to Westbridge with a renewed sense of purpose. The journey had been challenging, but she was now seeing firsthand how her efforts were impacting others far beyond the hospital. Westbridge's transformation had not only improved the lives of its staff and patients, but it sparked a broader movement across the healthcare industry. In the days that followed, Alana reflected on how far she had come, from a lone voice in the halls of Westbridge to a beacon of change. She knew there was still much work to be done, but her vision was clear: a healthcare system where compassion, respect, and inclusion were the core principles guiding every decision. And as she prepared for the next step in her journey, Alana felt an unshakable conviction that the seed she had planted would continue to grow, touching lives she might never meet but inspiring change that would endure. A year had passed since Alana Davis first stepped into Westbridge Medical Center, burdened by the weight of isolation and exclusion. Now, as she walked through its bustling halls, the atmosphere was almost unrecognizable. Where once there had been whispered remarks and skeptical glances, there was now camaraderie, mutual respect, and a shared commitment to empathy. The changes Alana had worked tirelessly to implement had taken root, transforming Westbridge into a place where diversity and inclusion weren't just words on a policy sheet, but the very foundation of its culture. Reflecting on the journey, Alana was struck by how far she had come. As the hospital's chief diversity officer, she had overseen programs and initiatives that encouraged open dialogue, empathy training, and mentorship. She had witnessed countless small but meaningful transformations within her colleagues. The quiet nurse who once kept her head down now led team discussions on inclusivity. Doctors who had once dismissed the importance of diversity training now participated eagerly, sharing their own experiences and learning from others. Alana's growth as a leader hadn't just been professional. On a personal level, she had learned the profound impact that resilience and compassion could have in even the most challenging environments. Her journey had been filled with difficult moments, but each one had reinforced her belief that true strength lay in not only standing firm in one's principles, but also in inspiring others to do the same. One afternoon, as Alana was wrapping up her day, she received a message from Thomas Blake, the CEO of Healthcare United and the man who had been her ally from the very beginning. He wanted to meet to discuss the impact her work had made, both at Westbridge and beyond. During their meeting, Thomas greeted her with a warm smile. "Because of your work, other hospitals in our network have started adopting similar diversity initiatives. Your journey has sparked a movement, Alana. That's no small feat." Their conversation drifted to the broader impact of her work. Alana learned that her efforts had not only inspired changes in other hospitals, but had also led to the creation of a network-wide initiative within Healthcare United. This initiative focused on ensuring that every facility fostered a culture of empathy, respect, and collaboration, recognizing that an inclusive environment was critical to the well-being of both patients and staff. As their conversation ended, Thomas leaned forward, his tone serious but filled with admiration. "You've shown that even in the most resistant places, compassion and persistence can break down walls. Your legacy here is just beginning, Alana." As Alana walked out of Thomas's office, his words echoed in her mind. She had never sought recognition or praise. Her mission had always been about creating an environment where everyone, regardless of background, could feel valued and respected. But knowing that her story was sparking broader change filled her with a sense of purpose that extended beyond the walls of Westbridge. The legacy Alana left at Westbridge wasn't just about policy changes or diversity training. It was a legacy of resilience. The resilience to continue pushing forward when others doubted. The resilience to believe in one's worth despite the world's attempts to undermine it. She had shown her colleagues and future leaders that standing up for what is right requires courage and consistency. The story of Alana's transformation also carries a powerful lesson for everyone. Meaningful change doesn't happen overnight. It often requires taking uncomfortable steps, enduring setbacks, and confronting biases, both from others and within ourselves. But when we stay true to our values and persist in our efforts, we can create lasting impact. Alana's journey reminds us that resilience isn't just about surviving difficult moments. It's about turning those moments into opportunities for growth and for setting a path that others can follow. Her story also underscores the importance of allies like Thomas Blake, people who recognize the value of diversity and actively support change. Without his backing, Alana's journey would have been much harder. His willingness to confront injustice within his organization allowed Alana to effect change from within, showing that true leadership involves empowering others. In the end, Alana's transformation of Westbridge Medical Center symbolizes the potential each of us holds to influence our surroundings. Her legacy of compassion, inclusion, and resilience will continue to echo through the healthcare industry, inspiring others to prioritize dignity, respect, and empathy. Alana's story illustrates that even a single individual can ignite a movement, and that with dedication and support, institutions can become places of healing and hope, not just for patients, but for all who work within them. And so, as Alana looked back on her journey, she felt at peace. Her struggles had been worth it, each one contributing to a future where others would feel safe, seen, and valued. She knew her work wasn't over. There would always be more to do, more voices to uplift, more walls to break down. But with every step forward, Alana carried with her the unshakable belief that change was possible. She had created a legacy not just of transformation but of unwavering hope, a beacon that would continue to shine in healthcare and beyond.